Good practices in writing. Topic will be using mentor texts. Carl Anderson says that a mentor text is a well-written text you show students to help them see how they can craft their own writing and also how to use writing conventions effectively. Mentor texts can be published texts by well-known authors, texts you've written, or texts written by your students. When you think about how we learn to do many things, we often have a mentor we can turn to as an example or inspiration for how to do the work we want to do. We all had mentor teachers in our education practicums. This is how we apprentice into the work we want to do. When we use mentor texts, we begin to see the interconnectedness between reading and writing, and we learn how to read like a writer. We see how authors use craft and conventions in real-world writing, and allows us not to just tell students about a move they can make in their writing, but to show an authentic example. It also gives students an authentic reason to reread, which builds comprehension. It is also the kind of work we do when we leave school and are looking for mentors or models of things we need to do as a writer. We always begin by enjoying and responding to the text as a reader, and after that, we can look more closely at the text as a writer. We also need to ensure that we are modeling for students how to do this, that we practice together before we expect them to do it on their own. We naturally begin to read like a writer to an extent. We draw upon our bank of knowledge later when we're creating texts. We make sure that writers are reading like a writer to build the craft repertoire and also to study craft techniques. Alison Marchetti and Rebecca Odell have this model or these steps of writing for upper grades of how to learn how to read like a writer. And this is from their book, Mentor Texts for Grades 6 to 12. Much of the work I'm going to share is going to be based upon Carl Anderson's book, A Teacher's Guide to Mentor Texts in Grades K to 5. So he outlines a 5-step process for teaching with mentor text. Firstly, we find a mentor texts that we want to use. You'll need 3 to 4 per unit of study, and you want to ensure you have different authors. We want to ensure that those mentor texts that we have also are representative of the students in our classrooms. So we want to ensure that we are using diverse text in which they see themselves. We also want to ensure that we are using a diversity of authors. You want to choose books that you see a lot of potential teaching points in. And you have to ensure that the students are able to understand the text. There are lots of places to find good mentor texts. One place to look for diverse books is weneeddiversebooks.org. We need to get to know those mentor texts. We read them and we look for possible teaching points and craft techniques. And you make sure it's a text, like I said, that you can revisit often. You want to try this out on your own, but it's also very powerful to do it with colleagues, as you can come up with even more teaching points when you work together. The third step is immersing our students in mentor text, and you want to take about 2 to 3 days at the beginning of a unit of study for this immersion. And we want to make sure we're reading aloud to students and that they can also read them with support if needed. And we allow time for those discussions. Anderson outlines a 3-day possible plan for doing that immersion. The next step is leading a whole class text study. This will be about 2 days in length, and it begins after the students have already started to draft their texts. According to Anderson, this is one of the most important parts of a craft unit of study. He lists several possible craft studies you can do. And this 5th step is that text study is we want to reread mentor text and try to have that text visible for students. We want to make notes on our copy of the text of student noticings to assist in our discussions. Then we're going to select parts for discussion, and those you want to choose ones that many students liked, that show craft techniques you also want your students to learn. You're going to discuss several craft techniques, and you want to ask students, what do you notice about how whatever author you're using wrote this part? Ask them, why do you think they used this technique? Give the technique a name as a group. If they can't come up with one, you could provide one for them. And you also want to ask them, have you seen others use this technique? Finally, we give them the opportunity to try out that technique. We can teach with our mentor texts in our whole class mini lessons, when we're working with small groups of students, and when we have individual conferences. These are 3 of my favorite teacher professional resources for using mentor texts. As I said, I highly relied on Carl Anderson's work of A Teacher's Guide to Mentor Text for K-5. I mentioned the Marchetti and Odell one, A Teacher's Guide to Mentor Text, grades 6 to 12. And Penny Kittle also has an excellent new book, Micro Mentor Text, using short passages from great books to teach writer's craft. And I can highly recommend all of them. I have shared with you a document which has some possible mentor texts just to get you started, but their opportunities are endless. Make sure it's a book you love or a text you love and your students love. Thank you for joining us.